Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me in this video. Today I just want to share with you my experience writing the ISLPR test, or the International Second Language Proficiency Rating test. I wrote it in Melbourne, but I live in Alice Springs, and my intention for writing that exam was to use the exam result for teacher registration in the Northern Territory, okay? Yeah, in this video, I'm going to share with you briefly what I found in the exam. Not so much what I did to prepare myself, but just the exam. So if you don't understand anything about the exam and you don't know anything about the exam, this is your video, because I'll tell you the structure of the exam, what I saw in the exam, and what my experience was, okay? So I have finished preparing for the exam, and I get on a plane. I go to Melbourne. When I got to Melbourne, I went to scan the place just to know where I was going to write the exam. And after that, the following morning, I was in the exam room. The first thing that I encountered was the speaking test. So you meet a lady at the door who is going to tell you which booth you're going to write from. So I went into my booth, found my examiner or the tester waiting for me. She greeted me, and I knew from the very beginning that as soon as she begins to talk to me, the exam was started. But the examiner was kind enough to explain to me the rules and also to tell me that we have now started the exam, so that I know. But you just need to prepare yourself that simple questions like, how are you? Tell me about where you are coming from. Those are part of the exam. So the speaking test started with questions like, tell me about Alice Springs, tell me about the place. And then from there, she asked me to talk about my work. So I talked about my work, what I'm doing, and what I intend to do with the test results. Okay, then she asked me to talk about my teaching experience. Now, everything that she asked me from that moment was about teaching. Why? Because my exam I was writing that exam in order to do teacher registration. So most of the questions that you'll be asked will be centered on your personal background and also your professional background. And where do they get information to ask you these questions? Information comes from what you give them at the point of registration. So when you register, they'll ask you simple questions like, why do you want this test? For teacher registration, for which state? And yeah, it's not a very tough game, honestly speaking, but just understand your situation, your background, what you are working, your professional background, where you have worked, and what you intend to do. Then lastly, she asked me to talk about how the community accepts me as an international, or as a foreigner working in Australia. So I talked briefly about that. Now, in all these, the examiner is not so much interested in you telling them about the place. The examiner is marking your use of language, how good you are at constructing sentences and varying your sentences from short sentences, long sentences, complex sentences, simple sentences, and just like that. So you need to express yourself. Secondly, apart from how you construct your sentences, but how you put your ideas together, how you communicate. For example, when she said, tell me about how you are being received as a foreigner working in an indigenous community, right? I need to put my thoughts together to express or to communicate to her what she expected me to do. So just know that you need to have your thoughts together. Secondly, you need to use professional language. Don't use difficult words, because even the examiner herself didn't use any words that were difficult for me to understand. Everything was clear. Everything was simple. She was speaking to me like a real person will speak to another real person. So the exam wasn't so much of testing, no, using big words and stuff like that. It is as realistic as it can be. Yeah, it's more like a conversation, but think of two professionals having a conversation or a discussion, except one is asking questions and the other, which is you or me in that situation, answering those questions. Then from there, we moved to the listening part. In the listening part, there was a child speaking and there was an adult speaking. Now, this child was being asked something to do with what she was doing at school to fundraise. Now, the reason I feel why I was given to listen to a child was because I was doing teacher registration. And when you do teacher registration, you're going to be speaking to young people in school. And if you're going to speak to young people, you need to have an ear for their accent, because in Australia, there are so many different accents. Yeah, like from especially young people. So you just need to get used to listening to young people. So to prepare for this, maybe you need to listen to Australian cartoons or Australian programs where children are involved, you know. It could be TV programs or TV shows or radio programs where children are involved. Then the second audio I listened to was two teachers discussing. Now, here is the thing. I've been a teacher before in my country. I worked for about 9 years in the school setup. So that gave me an edge, because when the teachers were discussing everything that they talked about, I somehow had an experience, you know what I mean? So listening to adults, firstly, it was clear they were professional, they were in a professional setup, they were in a school. So speaking, they didn't use much of Aussie slang, which is sometimes difficult to understand. So when that tape was playing, I could understand everything, and then I could also relate to their conversations being a teacher. But if you don't need to worry, if you have never taught before, you can still understand, because it's just a normal conversation. And these teachers are not using terminologies that you cannot understand. So I understood what the teachers were talking about. And the questions, I was asked questions, simple questions like, who was speaking in this conversation? What did they talk about? And there was a bit of specific questions like, how many things did they talk about? For the child, I was actually asked to say, as she was fundraising, how much did she raise? Now, for this part of the exam, which is the second part, you'll be given a paper and pen, and you are free to write as you listen. And actually, for me, you know what I did? As I started listening, I told the examiner like to give me a moment. So after that, I was told you can use your notes as you speak. But here is the thing, and I'm going to give this advice to you. The reason you are being asked or you are tested in the listening test or in the listening part of the test is for you to show to the examiner that you heard the conversation, you listened, and you understood, right? So if you're going to be reading your notes in front of the examiner, that's a red flag. You will not get the grade. So for me, I avoided at all to look at my notes. I looked at my notes when I wrote them, and the examiner asked me if she could start asking me questions, and that's the moment I looked at the notes. Yeah, so just bear in mind that even if you are given a paper, do not read for the examiner. Show that you heard, you listened, and you understood, okay? That is what you are supposed to do. The third part of the exam was the reading. I was given two passages to read. The first one was just a paragraph, like just a paragraph of about 9 or less than 9 lines. And that one I was supposed to read so that the examiner can assess my reading abilities. So when you are given that one and you're supposed to read, no questions will be asked from that passage. The examiner just wants, sometimes they might ask you questions from that short passage, but the main purpose is just for the examiner to know if you can read. And when you read, is your reading something that students can understand or any other person can understand? So the best way to beat the fright and to give yourself an advantage is to read at a normal pace. Do not be fast. And again, I asked the examiner if I could just go through the passage before I read loudly. I don't know what kind of, I don't know the examiner that you are going to find in that exam. I don't know what he or she is going to say, or maybe she's going to be friendly or not. But for me, I just said, okay, can I get a moment? I didn't say, can I read through the passage before I read for you? I just said, can I get a moment? And then she was like, yeah. So I took 1 minute to just, scan the passage. And no, I didn't actually scan. I skimmed the passage because I had to read very quickly. And then I started reading. One thing I remembered was make sure you use punctuation marks to the fullest. Where there is a comma, you can pause. Or when you read, just feel how the passage is going. Read as if you are speaking to someone. So take your time. Don't be too slow. Don't be too fast. Just balance so that you give that pace where the examiner will understand you. So the second part of the reading test was I was given a long passage, and that passage was a bit technical, and I was asked questions. And the good thing is in the ISLPR test, all these sections, 3 from speaking to listening and reading, you do not write anything. So the questions, they ask you question verbally and you need to respond verbally. So you just speak to the examiner. And somehow, if you read the website, the official website, they will tell you that speaking is something that they examine throughout the exam, because you'll be speaking section, you'll be speaking, reading section, you'll be speaking, and listening section, you'll be speaking. You won't have to write anything until writing itself comes, which was the last section or the last part of the exam. And I was given to write 2 essays. The first one was a letter to another school requesting for a debate, requesting for an inter-school debate program, which for me again was easy to do that because I know that when we are in school, we teach 3 types of letters. The first one is an informal letter where you teach students to write a letter to their friends. And then a semi-formal letter, a letter that is written to people that you respect. So the language is almost formal but not formal. If you see what I mean, that's why it's half formal. Then the last one is a formal one where you use formal language, formal salutations, everything is formal. And how do you do that? You follow all the sections of the letter, like sender's address, receiver's address, the salutation, the main body, the introduction, the main body, the conclusion, and how you end that. So I knew about all those letters. Because that's what that's what I know how to write anyway. So I wrote that letter. And just a word of advice, if any letter, they will not say write a formal letter or an informal letter, but you just know where it's going. If they say write a letter to your friend, then you need to write a letter which is an informal letter. If they say write a letter to your uncle, or someone respectable in society, like, you just know that this is a semi-formal letter, or maybe a letter to the editor. You can write that as a semi-formal letter. But if you are writing to your school or to another school, usually if you are writing the exam for teacher registration, the letter or whichever test they give you to have something to do with the school. You could be asked to write a speech, which I was actually asked as a second form of writing. I was asked to write a speech because we had a function at a school, and they said write a speech to give at this occasion. Again, you need to know how to write a speech. You can't cheat. Now, what are the takeaways from this test? Firstly, I noticed that you can't cheat. If you don't know, you don't know. The test is so personal and realistic. And what I mean, it's different, from IELTS. I've written IELTS before for immigration. I know that in IELTS, there is a lot of unrealistic questions. Like the things that they test there, really, it's not so much personalized. But this test, it is based on you, based on the information that you give them. So firstly, you cannot cheat because it is personal. The questions are centered on the information that you provide to them at the time of registration. Secondly, it's very hard to prepare for this kind of test. And actually, their official website says so, that it's very hard for them to teach you because you just need to know how to speak English. If you don't know how to speak English, you can't cheat your way in or out. For writing tasks, you either know how to write what task you are given or you don't know. For example, I was given to write a formal letter. If you don't know how to write a formal letter, you don't know. You can't cheat your way. It's very hard. And for the reading, it's either you understand the passage or you don't understand the passage. So this is what I mean are the takeaways from this exam. But what I have done based on my experience and how I prepared myself, I wrote a book. I'll put the link in the description. I wrote an ebook. I have put my experience there. I've also explained some of these things I've talked about in details so that you can just have a glimpse. But I've also written another ebook which you can use to prepare for your grammar, which you use anyway, like in your speaking and in your writing, you use grammar. So I've written another ebook, which will be on my website. If you want, you can check them out. But did I see any teacher or any lessons before going to write the exam? The answer is no. So if you are confident with the way you are speaking, okay, just listen to me. The way I'm speaking, I passed, I got, and I don't think I speak any different. You know what I mean? So I didn't have to see an instructor to teach me because that exam is very specific. The way you prepare for it is go into grammar, go into writing, go into whatever forms and the form of learning. And when you combine together those skills and the knowledge that you acquire from general knowledge, learning of English and interacting with people who speak English, that is what you take to the exam room, and that is what works for you. So if you are interested in knowing more about how I passed, there's a link in the description. You can buy that book. So thank you so much for listening. I'll give you more information and I'll be giving you more tips. Bye-bye.